Let's have a look at some of the day's other main stories, because the Scottish National Party leader and First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has launched her party's election campaign in Edinburgh, putting Brexit and Scottish independence at the centre of the SNP's election strategy. She said she'd be willing to cooperate with any Labour government led by Jeremy Corbyn. She ruled out a formal coalition, but said she could support Labour on a vote-by-vote basis, as long as the Scottish Parliament was granted the right to hold a second independence referendum and given more powers. The First Minister has been speaking to our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg.
She wants two things: to stay in the EU.
We want Scotland to remain inside the EU.
But Scotland to be out of the UK.
Should not be for Westminster to decide.
But if she worked with Jeremy Corbyn, could this election give the SNP both the outcomes they want and change the course of the country for us all?
And if there is a hung parliament after this election, SNP MPs would seek to form a progressive alliance to lock the Tories out of government.
To be crystal clear about this, if Labour was looking to seek a government and they accepted the principle of having another vote on independence in Scotland, you would be willing to form an alliance that would put Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street.
I would never put Boris Johnson into Downing Street.
But you would put Jeremy
but
Corbyn
we would,
in.
and if people are worried about Jeremy Corbyn, with good reason in many respects, then better to have SNP MPs in there making sure the right issues are progressed and the right values are protected than having a Jeremy Corbyn government without that influence of the SNP.
You said this morning that Brexit, if it goes forward, means years more of wrangling, economic uncertainty. That's exactly the same as it would be if there was another independence referendum, isn't it?
It was never inevitable that Brexit became the chaotic mess that it has done. You do the work, do the thinking, be honest with people about the trade-offs in advance. They didn't do the planning for it.
977,000 people voted SNP in 2017, but 1,018,000 voted to leave. So when you say all the time that the people of Scotland would be dragged out of the EU against their will, 1 million Scots wanted to leave.
I find that a bizarre kind of perversion of democracy. So yes, you're comparing a referendum result with a general election on different turnouts, first of all. Is the
turnout
first point.
higher in the EU
but
referendum.
Exactly. There was a majority, not a narrow majority in Scotland, with the highest Remain vote of any part of the UK. So we have to find a way of plotting a course out of it, and one fundamentally that allows people in Scotland to be in charge of our future and the kind of country we want to be.
Labour won't parade it around.
Morning. I will get a small cappuccino.
But they would contemplate another independence referendum if they needed SNP votes to govern.
We want Scotland to remain part of the Union. We're very clear about that, and that's why we will not be doing deals. We're in this election to win it.
So it's absolutely beautiful building.
It's a gift for the Conservatives, certainly. The Prime Minister campaigning in a hospital today. They were already making the claim that Labour and the SNP were in cahoots.
Nicola Sturgeon has made crystal clear that the price of her support for Jeremy Corbyn is making sure that we have two referendums. We know that Corbyn is desperate to get into Downing Street. We know that he will do a deal with the SNP.
Just as kissing babies is familiar in a campaign, so too will be the question of independence in this election.
I will vote with and work with other parties on issues where we agree, but when it comes to the SNP, they need to drop their obsession, absolute obsession, with independence.
What's more important to you, staying in the EU or Scotland becoming an independent country?
Both of these things are important to me, and increasingly, well, I've campaigned for independence all in my life, putting the decisions about our future into our own hands. So independence is much more of a fundamental foundation for the kind of country we want to be.
But in Scotland, it's hard to talk about one without talking about the other. Brexit was the reason for this election, yet the future shape of the whole UK is right in the middle. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Well, as Nicola Sturgeon made clear there, the battleground in Scotland is markedly different to the rest of the UK. Not only is the SNP the largest party by far, but many of the issues being debated at Westminster, such as health, education, public spending, are controlled by the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government. Our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, has been considering the challenge for the SNP in this election.
What are the key questions the SNP has to answer? What do they mean by vote SNP to escape Brexit? The SNP are totally opposed to Brexit, believing it would be enormously damaging to the economy, in Scotland in particular. They want the opportunity to have another referendum on Scottish independence, and if they won that vote, an independent Scotland would hope to rejoin the European Union. That could raise issues similar to the arguments about the border on the island of Ireland, if Scotland was inside the EU and the rest of the UK was not. But when could there be another independence referendum? For that to happen, the Scottish Government needs the permission of the government in Westminster. The SNP believe they've already got a mandate for another referendum because they've got more than half of all the MPs in Scotland, and the Scottish Parliament's already voted in favour of it. Nicola Sturgeon wants it to happen before the end of next year. But Boris Johnson has completely ruled out allowing another vote on independence. And while Labour wouldn't block a referendum, they do say it's unnecessary and unwanted. In a hung parliament, would the SNP support a coalition government? The SNP say they would never support a Tory government. But they also say they would not enter a formal coalition with Labour. Instead, they want to form a progressive alliance, working with other parties where they agree on the issues. Their price would be more powers for the Scottish Parliament, and Nicola Sturgeon says Jeremy Corbyn needn't even bother picking up the phone unless he's prepared to allow a referendum on Scottish independence. Now, they might be able to strike a deal if Mr Corbyn were to agree in principle that it was up to Scotland to decide when that vote should happen.
That was our Scotland editor there, Sarah Smith. Well, the Prime Minister has insisted that Britain will not enforce checks on goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland under his Brexit deal, prompting widespread claims that he's simply contradicting his own government's position. He's been under pressure to clarify his stance after he spoke in Northern Ireland last night. Our correspondent Chris Page is in Belfast tonight to talk more about this. Chris, what has been the impact there of the remarks that Boris Johnson made?
Well, Huw, the recurrent Brexit border brain teaser has been this. How do you keep the land frontier between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic open while at the same time avoiding checks on goods moving between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK? Well, last night Boris Johnson gave an off-the-cuff briefing to some local Conservative Party members in County Armagh. One business person asked, would he have to fill in customs forms for products he was sending from here to England, Scotland or Wales? Mr Johnson said no, he wouldn't, and in fact he said any paperwork could go in the bin. Now, the Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay and the Home Office have both previously indicated there would have to be some form of an administrative process. But there have been more questions about goods moving in the other direction, goods making the journey from Great Britain into Northern Ireland that are destined to stay here and not cross over the border into the Irish Republic. Mr Johnson said that under those circumstances the goods wouldn't need to be inspected at all. But trade experts and business groups here have said they believe checks will be needed because in essence under the Brexit deal Northern Ireland will still have to follow many rules of the EU single market, for example in the area of meat products and dairy products. So Labour have accused the Prime Minister of not understanding the deal he's negotiated. Mr Johnson's emphasised today that this deal's a good one for Northern Ireland. All these issues may be highly technical, but in this election campaign they're also highly political.
Chris, thanks very much once again. Chris Page there for us in Belfast. Well, the Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage has been on the campaign trail in South Wales, where he told supporters that his party was the only one which would deliver what he called a clean break with the EU. Brexit Party say that they'll be fielding 600 candidates across the UK, but Mr Farage has decided not to stand himself. Some in the party are questioning the strategy, as our political correspondent Alex Forsyth tells us now.
Nigel Farage. It's just days into the election, but his campaign has gone on for decades, and he's not letting up. Tonight in Wales, Nigel Farage was still pushing for a Brexit pact with Boris Johnson. His demand now?
Boris, please toughen up on this deal. It's not good enough as it is.
The Conservatives have ruled out a pact, in which case he says he'll put up candidates in 600 seats, taking on even Tory Brexiteers, but earlier insisting they're not his main target.
Look at where we are now in South Wales. So many Labour voters who voted Leave, and they're our key targets. So yes, sure, we'll take votes from everybody, but the idea that it somehow splits the vote is nonsense. And I would also point out, we want a genuine Brexit. Boris wants a Remainers Brexit. I wish he'd shift that position.
But there are some wishing Nigel Farage would shift, concerned about uncompromising tactics. Peter Udall resigned as a Brexit Party candidate yesterday, fearful a Leave split will hand Labour a victory, accepting now Boris Johnson's deal is the best option.
Everybody's sitting there thinking, well, should we split the vote? Should we vote for the Tories or should we vote for Brexit Party? They're hugely loyal to Nigel. But it's a dilemma that people are trying to deal with at the moment. And there is a danger that in the search for the perfect, that we give away the achievable.
Quiet conversations are happening across the country. When to stand firm, whether to stand aside. We've spoken to other Brexit Party members concerned about the current strategy of targeting every seat.
Only a fraction of Brexit Party candidates have pulled out so far, some half a dozen out of hundreds. But some have said they were attracted to the Brexit Party when Theresa May led the Tories because they didn't like her approach to leaving the EU. But they are persuaded by Boris Johnson. What's key is whether voters might feel the same.
Many of his supporters are convinced he is right to keep up the pressure, critical of those with doubts.
Too many people are wavering at the moment. We don't want to spoil a deal if there is one, but Boris's is not it.
I think what they're trying to do at the moment is make us believe that the deal that's being offered is a good deal. Even just as being as an ordinary citizen, I've read through and it's not.
With such Brexit arguments already proving crucial in this election, how he chooses to approach it really does count. Alex Forsyth, BBC News.